Beck, I'm 21 years old, I'm from West Bromwich and I'm a bisexual trans male. I think it's important to have LGBT plus spaces because sometimes when you're just in the general public, you don't really feel like it's always safe to be yourself. Like, for example, if I wanted to go out and it was the summer and I wanted to wear just a tank top and my binder, I wouldn't really feel comfortable doing that in every space. And I think when there are places like the Birmingham Gay Village in particular, it's a lot easier and you feel more comfortable because you'll see other people like yourself and people won't really take exception or raise questions about the way that you're dressed or who you're going out with and that sort of thing. For example, there's one cafe in Birmingham that's in the Gay Village and it's run by gay people, and I feel comfortable presenting in a way that people can recognise that I'm transgender, because I know I don't fully pass and it's quite obvious when I wear a tank top and a binder. And I feel more comfortable going there and getting, say, a cup of coffee than I would wearing the same things going into city centre and getting a coffee. I think it's important that we have lots of different types of spaces because people tend to see the LGBT community as something that's quite promiscuous sometimes. And it's important that we have things that aren't just about that sort of intimate contact. We need places to be ourselves comfortably, like to go read a book, to go just sit and have a chat, to have like a cup of tea or something with other people in an environment where you don't feel on edge all the time. Sometimes when you are dressing a certain way, or if you wanted to hold hands with a same-sex partner in public, you just don't feel secure all the time, if that makes sense. As for online spaces, I think it's important for young people to know that there are spaces out there for young people, like Facebook groups. I've been in a couple of transgender Facebook groups and bisexual people Facebook groups, but you do need to take things like that with a pinch of salt because there's so many people and it's such a charged atmosphere that just because people are, like you, part of the LGBT community, it doesn't mean that everything they say is going to be fantastic gospel truth. There are still going to be people with inflammatory opinions in the community and out of the community, and it's important not to kind of idolize these communities too much, because at the end of the day we're all still human beings and we all make mistakes and we all say things that we maybe go on to regret, especially on the internet where things are kind of there forever. I think it's good to have online and offline spaces and not just stick to one or the other, because from my experience, before I was out in public, I would just go on these Facebook groups all the time. But it ended up making me personally feel worse because the focus of these groups is usually things that are happening in the news, and that's usually like negative news that they focus on instead of like celebrating what happens and things like that. Like I'd go on Facebook and it would be all these articles about, oh, transgender people are being attacked for this reason, they're having this right taken away from them, or something along those lines. And I think at the end of the day, it really helps if you have a place offline where you can go and talk to people and vent your negative emotions, so you're not just keeping it all in and putting it on the internet. Because it's not just about you personally, it's about how other people who are going to that group for a safe space might react when they see all this negativity all the time. Yeah, there are still people who are like homophobic or transphobic, but it's not really very helpful when you're just going on the internet and like saying straight people are horrible because they did this and this. Like, yeah, some people do like to kind of attack us, but I don't think going and having these big online arguments and fights is really going to help bring us together, which at the end of the day is what we all want. I think there's this sort of dangerous assumption in the community and just in society as a whole that if you're transgender, you sort of know from when you're 2 years old, walking and talking like, oh, I'm transgender. And I don't think that's true at all for everyone. I mean, some people might have that experience, but for a lot of people, it's something that they realize over time. Especially for me, I didn't think when I was having body image issues that, oh, this is gender dysphoria. I just thought I was another teenage girl having these sort of self-doubts about my own body image. I had therapy for anxiety and depression for a while, and that did help with the negative emotions, but we couldn't find the underlying cause. And I always thought when I was younger that if you had gender dysphoria, you just sort of knew in your head, like, this is gender dysphoria, because no one really talks about it and no one really tells you what it feels like, except, oh, you're just going to hate your body, that sort of thing. I think that held me back in a lot of respects because I didn't consider that it was something that could happen, because I thought that I'd already know, or someone would have already just gone, oh yeah, you've got gender dysphoria, when I went to like my therapist or something like that. But the real thing came to me when I was in a shop and I was wearing a hoodie and I had short hair at the time. And the shopkeeper just said to me, "Can I help you, sir?" And that was like a big turning point for me, because I didn't understand at first why I just felt really happy and excited that I'd just been referred to as a male. I was like, wow, this is different, but it's nice. And I understand, looking back, that all those other times when I had self-doubts and I was unhappy and I had all these body image issues, I could start to connect the dots in my head. I was thinking to myself, well, maybe this is what gender dysphoria is about. And I mean, everyone experiences it in different ways. For some people, it's quite obvious. They're like, oh, I want to change this specific part of my body and I want to do this specific thing. But for other people, it's more open and they can't quite put their finger on it at first, I think. And I think when I was younger and I was growing up, I always felt a bit like an outcast, and I felt like maybe other children didn't see me as the kind of person I wanted to be, but I just didn't understand why. And looking back, I feel more confident now going forward because I've been able to figure out why I felt that way. So that means I can sort of fix it and take steps to be more comfortable and do what I want to do. So I think it's really dangerous just to assume, especially when you're young, that you're just going to know straight away, because that's not always true. And sometimes it takes a bit of exploring and thinking back and trying new experiences. And that's what sort of sets the bells ringing, if you know what I mean. I think it's really important to have people who you can talk to. When I was 12 years old, I didn't know that the LGBT community was even a thing. I just assumed that, I don't know, some weird belief that like if you were gay, you didn't really have anyone else to talk to about that and you'd just be in a corner upset about it or something like that. But a real turning point for me was when I was 12 and I was speaking to my friends about my feelings about, because at the time I still was unsure about my gender identity, but I was definitely more certain that I wasn't heterosexual. And I was talking to him, and it felt really scary at first because I was confiding in a friend, but I didn't know how they'd react. Especially because back then there was hardly any media about LGBT people. Like, we didn't have like Orange is the New Black, we didn't have like kids' cartoons with gay characters and stuff. So he was really understanding and he pointed me in the right direction. He sort of introduced me to the LGBT community as a whole, and I think that was the main turning point for me, because as soon as I knew that there was that sort of network there was no going back. I could reach out to people, I could get the support I needed, I could find other people my age who were like me, and I felt more comfortable to talk about it to others as well, because I knew I always had that sort of crutch to fall back on if people didn't understand. And if I didn't understand, because I was only 12 years old, there were always these kinds of people my age who would relate, and these people who were a bit older that could sort of pass on that information about what they'd learned from their experience. And when I was a bit older and I was ready to come out to my friends as transgender, I was really scared, even though I was in a friend group that was mostly lesbians and bisexual women, because there was that separation at the time between the LGB and the T. People didn't talk about transgender people as much as it was okay to talk about lesbians and bisexual women. So I felt about as uncertain as I would have if I was coming out to my family. And luckily for me, I did have a really supportive friend group and I just felt really relieved. So I think it's so important to kind of reach out to other people in the community, even if they're not exactly like you, because that way you have more friends, and you do have some experiences in common with them as well. Like, we all have that fear of telling new people sometimes, and we all have that fear of sometimes going out in public the way we want to present ourselves or who we want to go out with. So we really have more in common than some people like to make out, and it's definitely something that we need to work on, I think. So I would say if you're young and you have LGBT friends, you all have to support each other, because it's not always easy. I mean, it's easier than it was like 20 years ago, I would say. But at the same time, we still need to help each other, and we still need to lift each other up or support each other when we're feeling down, because at the end of the day, if we can't have cohesion amongst ourselves, well, how are we going to expect other people to kind of be the same and offer us support when we don't even offer each other support? So I was lucky in that regard, but I know that I see people sometimes on the internet bickering amongst themselves, like, oh, this part of the community is somehow less valid, or this part of the community doesn't need our help. But I think that's counterproductive, because at the end of the day, we all need each other. I was really fortunate when I was 14 years old to have a friend who I could talk to about anything, and he came out to me first, actually. He told me he was bisexual, and it wasn't until years later that I came out to him as transgender, and he just accepted it straight away, and he's my boyfriend now. And I feel like coming out to him was perhaps one of the hardest things for me to do, because even though he was also part of the community, I felt like maybe he'd see me as a different person, or he'd be scared of all the changes, or he'd be put off by me wanting to have surgery in future or anything like that. But he was really understanding, and straight away he started referring to me among his friends as boyfriend and things like that, and it just really helped. And I think, especially comparing it to my past relationships where I've come out to them and they haven't taken it so well, and I just thought, oh, well, this is something I have to expect because I'm trans, not everyone's going to like that. But you really are worth respect as a person, I think. So I would tell young people especially not to be the person I was. Don't just sit there and take it and think, oh, it's okay because I've got to expect this, because you're worth the same as everyone else, and you deserve to be treated with the same respect as every other human being. So don't stand for people who are just going to try and walk all over it and tell you not to be yourself, because you deserve someone who accepts all of you, especially in a relationship like that. A question I get asked a lot by people is, how did you deal with going to an all-girls school? Like, wasn't that hell for you? Wasn't it awful? Yeah, a lot of the time it was, because sometimes you just feel invisible. And when the head teacher is standing in front of you going, I want everyone who goes from this school to be a nice, well-rounded young lady, and you just think, well, that doesn't apply to me, so it's almost like I don't matter. And that's through no fault of their own, obviously, because they expect it to be an all-girls school, but at the same time, it does wear you down a little bit. But you have to think about the other side of it, because my school was very strict, you will be proper young ladies and you'll do this, this and this. But on the other hand, I was getting a good education. I would go home to my mom like, Mom, I hate this school, I don't want to do it. And she's like, yeah, that's okay, I'll take you out if you really want, but you won't get as good an education anywhere else. And that made me sort of want to stick with it and keep going. And now I've come out the other end, I feel like, wow, I survived that, I can take on anything now. And now I'm going to university, I've got a good job, I'm working really hard at the moment, and I think if you let things get you down too much, it's damaging for the rest of your life. But it was a bit weird. The way I describe it to people is, imagine if you're in a business conference and everyone's wearing a business suit and you're there in a clown costume or something like that. You just feel silly, and you feel like you don't belong, but people are just ignoring you and going about the rest of their business, and you feel a bit like an outsider. Well, why is no one helping me? Why is no one giving me a business suit? So yeah, you do feel a bit isolated sometimes, especially when you're in those single sex spaces. But when I reflect back on it, I think it really helped me grow as a person. Like, it taught me resilience. It taught me that you have to just take the good with the bad. And sometimes you'll be taking 5 steps forward and maybe 1 step back, but overall you've still taken 4 steps forward. And I'm not saying by any means that people should just go through things that make them really uncomfortable just because they think they'll get something good at the end. Because at the end of the day, it's about your safety. But my personal experience was that if you can stick things for a little while and it's not damaging you too much, then you should take it in your stride, and you should learn the lessons that come with that. Because being LGBT, yeah, you meet lots of great people, you go on great experiences, you go to Pride, it's fantastic, but obviously you're still going to have those little bumps in the road. And if I had left that school, I wouldn't have met my other LGBT friends, and I wouldn't have done as academically well as I could have, perhaps. And I think, looking back on it, having those friends was far more important to me than just my head teacher standing there saying hello ladies every morning, because they're the ones that help support me, and they're the ones who comforted me when I was crying to them because I was upset, or my dysphoria was getting too much for me to handle on one day. And in the long run, I think it was a good place for me to be, not because of the structure of it by all means, but because of the people that I was friends with and the opportunities that they gave me. Like, without them, I wouldn't have gotten to my university. And my university has been a huge breath of fresh air for me, because there was an LGBT society there. I'd never experienced anything like that before. So I met all these people, and they reached out to me with all this support that I never knew existed. So in the end, it was a good decision for me to stay, I think, because it introduced me to all these other things that I could never have got without it. I think sometimes it's hard to express yourself in the way that you'd want because of the way people expect you to behave. For instance, sometimes I like to wear a bit of makeup, and people sometimes come to me, oh, does this mean you're not identifying as trans anymore? No, it doesn't. It just means I want to wear some makeup today. I think people's expectations of how a trans person should behave isn't always going to fit everyone. There are things that we do that kind of go against stereotypes, and that doesn't make us any less what we are. It just means that we're identifying and behaving in ways that make us comfortable, and I think at the end of the day we all deserve to be able to live comfortably. Like my boyfriend, people go to him, well, you can't really be bisexual because you're really buff and you have a beard and all the rest of it. And I think that's just so silly, because everyone's different. We don't all fit the same mold. And I think it's dangerous to just assume that everyone's going to behave like your favourite LGBT celebrity, because that's not the case. Because even then, they're carefully constructed by people who design their wardrobe, by people who do their makeup, by the press. Like, that's not really them. That's just this glamorous side of them that's presented to us, and no one can be like that all the time. It's good to have people that you can look up to in the community, but at the same time we can't all be like them, otherwise we'd all be the same. I would tell my younger self to not spend so much time worrying about what people are going to think, and just go out there and do it. Like 2 years ago, I could have spoken to my GP and got referred to a gender identity clinic, and I'd be there by now, because the waiting list is 2 years long, and I only got the courage to do that a few months ago. So I'm going to be waiting and waiting, when really I could have done this so much further ago. Like, I could have done this when I was 18. And now I'm 21 and I'm still waiting. And I think at the end of the day, it's not about, oh, people are going to think this, and this of me. Because if you're just keeping it all inside and making yourself anxious and depressed and upset, you're not going to get anywhere, and it's getting you no nearer to that person you want to be. I think I could talk about my ex-boyfriend having a negative impact on my journey, because I came out to him right at the start of our relationship, and he's like, that's fine, but don't tell anyone. And I just assumed that's normal, that's fine, people aren't going to like it, I should just deal with that. But that held me back so much. And looking back, he was making me wear things that I didn't feel comfortable wearing. He was making me describe myself to people in ways that made me uncomfortable. And he was sort of just making me out to be a completely different person. And I put up with it for so long, and I just came to the realization that at the end of the day, I'm just like anyone else. I deserve the same amount of respect as anyone else. And I think that was a really hard decision to come to, because you don't want to feel selfish sometimes. And you think, oh, if I just put up with it, then I won't cause anyone else any trouble. Like, I don't want to worry my mom by breaking up with my boyfriend. I don't want to worry my friends by suddenly just taking off and moving out of his place. But at the end of the day, it's about you, and you just have to make yourself comfortable. Even though it was a horrible experience and it was a really rough year for me living with him, I think I've learned so much from it. So I wouldn't go back and like erase that time if I could, because it made me a stronger person, and it's made me more resilient, and it's made me know how to react when people say those things in future. And just because you're LGBT and in a relationship doesn't mean, oh, it's all going to be perfect and wonderful. Sometimes you do get stuck in relationships with bad people, and sometimes you do get stuck in abusive relationships, and you feel scared to tell people about it because you're LGBT, and they're going to be like, oh, well, it's because of that. But there are people that will seek to change you, but you shouldn't let them unless you want to do that change. It's about being that person you want to be, and anyone holding you back isn't really going to be a positive influence in your life. I would say that coming out isn't something that happens all in one go like people like to make out it is. You have to come out in different circles, and you have to do it at a rate that makes you feel safe and comfortable, because if it's not safe for you, then I would say don't come out yet, because your circumstances aren't static, they're going to change all the time, and putting yourself in danger isn't always a good idea. I would say an experience that was good for me was coming out to my friends, because they were so supportive and they didn't ask too many invasive questions. They just took it in stride, and they just treated me like one of the guys straight away, and that really helped me. But on the other hand, I've had negative experiences, like when I came out to my sister and her boyfriend, they weren't too pleased about it at first, and I was sort of the butt of a lot of jokes in the house, and it took a while for them to start taking me seriously, because they were of the opinion that if you're not just going to go get surgery straight away, make all these changes, then you're not really trans. But that's not true. It's a slow process. No one can just do things overnight. But I think the main thing is, coming out has mostly been positive for me, because even if not everyone's like super great about it straight away, it means I'm going on that journey and I'm taking those steps I want to take. And at some point I won't have to come out to people anymore, because I'll just be taken at face value the way I want to be, and that's what I aim for. So I have to take these little risks along the way when it's safe for me to do so, because it's all just part of my journey as a whole. So overall, I'd say that being LGBT plus is certainly something that has its ups and downs, but you can't change who you are at the end of the day. It's just about making the best of it and finding those people that support you. And it's not always going to be peachy. There's going to be bad times, but as long as you're yourself and you keep focusing on moving forward, then No matter how many little steps back you take, at the end of the day, you've always got to look at who you were right at the beginning, and then look at how far you've come, how much confidence you've gained, and how much clearer you feel about your own identity in your head. So you have to be proud of how far you've come, even if it's only a little bit. And if I was going to say something to young people as a whole, it is definitely that it does get better, but you have to help it get better. You can't just sit there and expect things to suddenly become magical. You do have to give yourself that sort of boost, that confidence, and say, I'm not going to take this negativity from anyone else. I'm not going to let it swim around in my head and make me upset all the time. I'm just going to take it as it comes, and I'm not going to let them bother me. I'm just going to be the person I want to be, and then I'll be happy at the end of the day. And I can say that I do definitely feel happier now than I did aged 14, being that scared little person who just, I thought I was just a depressed young girl and I didn't understand anything. But now, being who I am and being able to tell people that I'm a trans man and that I'm bisexual, it's sometimes scary, but I feel so much better being open, not only to other people, but also to myself.